Hey guys, Miss Sims here. Today I'm doing our second video in our biochemistry unit. Today's topic is carbon chemistry. So we're going to look at carbon, how it cycles through our planet and atmosphere, and how it is incorporated into some of those larger organic molecules that we looked at from last video. So first of all, the carbon cycle. This is about how carbon moves around in our planet through our soil, through our waters, through our atmosphere, and also through the living organisms that inhabit the planet. So carbon, just like all of the other elements and all of the other matter in the universe, cannot spontaneously appear or disappear. So that's why we're looking at this cycle. It can't just go away. It's going from one source to another place and transfers around. So the amount of carbon stays the same, but the form the carbon is in is what changes. So some things that can have the carbon trapped in it. For example, fossil fuels. Fossil fuels has a lot of the Earth's carbon trapped in that. Also, all living organisms. So these cows that they have here, the trees, the grass, the fish and other organisms that live in the water, the birds that fly in the air. All of those things have the carbon in them because living organisms are largely made of carbon. However, whenever those organisms go through different processes, that changes the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. For example, whenever you breathe, or whenever these cows breathe, or this bird breathes, or this fish breathes, what happens is you exhale carbon dioxide. And so that carbon dioxide will go up into the atmosphere. Other things, say one of the cows gets sick and passes away. What will happen is the carbon from that cow will break down and go into the soil. And then that soil, once it's in the soil, that carbon can be used by trees, not this sad tree, but maybe some other tree could take that carbon up in its roots and use it as nutrients to help it grow. So all of the carbon will go from one thing to another, and it will cycle through. One thing that really affects the carbon cycle in our world is fossil fuels. Fossil fuels, we take those, such as gasoline, for example, and we pump them out of the earth. And then we use them in factories or use them to power our favorite vehicle of choice. And what happens with that is all of that carbon that was originally trapped in the crust, not really doing anything, is now released. And that is what limits the ability of our Earth to release some of that heat that it's absorbing from the sun. And so this is what happens. It's called the greenhouse effect. The carbon from those released from those processes is trapped in the atmosphere, and it leads to global warming. So that's one of the biggest things that we as humans do that can affect the carbon cycle and really hinder its ability to keep a good balance. Other things, the deforestation, that releases a large amount as well. And also it limits the amount of oxygen we can get back from plants. Because remember, photosynthesis for plants takes in carbon dioxide, and then from that they release O2, or oxygen, that we breathe. So there's lots of things that humans do that kind of hurt this cycle. Things that we can do to help this cycle is plant more trees, get more of those things taking in carbon dioxide, and also just trying to be more green with what we're doing in our life. So maybe trying to use more fuel-efficient vehicles, and trying to carpool when we can, things like that. So yeah, so you don't need to know any of the numbers or anything like with this. Just know what different processes lead to release of carbon or absorption of carbon. One thing that a lot of the carbon in our atmosphere is incorporated into are organic compounds. And so one type of organic compound is what's called a hydrocarbon. So hydrocarbons, that word is broken into two parts. First part hydro, second part carbon. So carbon obviously is just C, just that element carbon from our periodic tables. However, hydro, if we're looking to try to figure out what that part is, well, what do you think of when you hear hydro? You might say water. And yeah, I agree, I would think of water too. But in this case, hydro actually just stands for hydrogen. So hydrogen is that hydro part there. So any compound, and these are particularly organic compounds because they have carbon, composed of only carbon and hydrogen. So only carbon and hydrogen. Those are going to be the hydrocarbons. So here we have some carbons, we have hydrogens around it. This one, if you're curious, is called butane. Here we have one carbon in the middle. This is a different way to depict a molecule. 3D model of a molecule, or a ball and stick model. This we have one carbon in the middle and 4 hydrogens around it. This is what we would call methane. Okay, and then we have here this larger molecule. This one you might say, oh, I only see one carbon. But an interesting way that a lot of times organic compounds are drawn, because they can get pretty complex, is each of the little bins, if it's not labeled as something else, will be a carbon. Okay. And because carbon, if you look at the periodic table, it has 4 valence electrons, which means it has 1, 2, 3, 4 open spots to make a full octet. Can make 4 total bonds. So each of these carbons should have 4 bonds to it. If you look here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, which is, 4 bonds to that carbon. However, if you look over here, you see how it has 1, 2, 3. So this one does not have the 4 bonds. So what actually we can add to that is another bond that goes to hydrogen. Because of the organic molecules getting kind of complicated, a lot of times they will draw these molecules but leave off all the hydrogens. And so if you look at the structure and you count up how many bonds each of those carbons have, you can figure out how many hydrogens are actually missing or not drawn in. I'm just going to quickly draw them in. I think that's all of them. I may have missed some. I'll have to go back and look later. But if you look, even on this molecule, it's pretty complicated if you go back and add all those hydrogens in. So that's why a lot of times they leave it out, just to keep it from looking too cluttered and complicated. So again, hydrocarbons are just organic compounds that only have carbon and hydrogen. Some of our macromolecules are going to be like this with just carbons and hydrogens, and some of them are going to have other things on there as well. Okay. If it has other objects on there, it's typically going to be a small area of the molecule that we're going to call a functional group. So this is a portion of the molecule that is typically active in a chemical reaction. So it's the part that reacts. And a lot of times it determines the properties of the organic molecules. Okay, so for example, these are some important functional groups that we're going to look at for this class. First one is a benzene ring. And so here we have 6 carbons in a hexagon shape there. And on that, we have 1 hydrogen coming off of each one. Something that's kind of interesting, you definitely don't need to know about benzene, is the guy that came up with the idea for benzene actually dreamed it up. And he woke up and told everybody his idea. But yeah, he dreamed it up. Kind of cool. And benzene is really cool because it's what's called an aromatic compound. Again, not something you'll need to know. But it is super duper strong. Okay. The next one is amine. Amine you can always recognize from this little nitrogen here. And this is the piece that you're looking for amine. The R there, R, anytime you see R for these functional groups just means the rest of molecule. Okay, so it doesn't really matter what it is. It might be a long 20 carbon chain. It might just be one carbon and a few hydrogens over here. We really don't know, and we really don't care. The main part is this little section. This, if you see this section, it means that it's an amine, and so that is the part you're looking for. If I said, oh, does this have a functional group of amine on it? Okay. The next one is phosphate. And phosphate you have heard before. Whenever we have talked about it in class, it's been PO4 with a -3 charge. If you look here, it does not have a charge on it, but the reason for that is because the negative charge has been taken care of by making it bond to different items. So by bonding to the hydrogens and then to the rest of the molecule. But it's still the basic PO4, so still PO4 just like from our polyatomic sheet for phosphate there. Okay. And the next one is alcohol, and we've also talked about this one before. Alcohol is really simple, just an O and an H, and this is what allows us to have ethanol, which is the alcohol that people may or may not partake in. It also is, however, the reason we have methanol. So methanol is relatively similar in structure to ethanol, just has one less carbon. But the issue is with alcohols, if somebody takes and makes their homemade alcohol, makes a moonshine type of thing, ethanol is the goal. They want to be able to just drink the alcohol from that. However, if it's not prepared correctly, it makes methanol, and methanol is what can make you go blind. So if you ever decide to partake in moonshine, once you're of age, of course, make sure that you trust whoever has made it, because if not, you might go blind. Okay. Next one's there, guys, is ether and ketone. Those two we are not going to worry about for this class, so you can just X those out. You do not need those. Okay. So then there are two basic types of reactions that are used to build a lot of these macromolecules. And so we're going to look at what these types of reactions are. And if I was to give you a visual of this reaction, then you should be able to recognize and say, oh, it's this type of reaction. Okay, so the first one is a dehydration reaction. So dehydration, if you are dehydrated, what do you lack? Hopefully you're thinking of water, okay? So dehydration, it lacks water. So if you are, for example, working out and you sweat a lot, you sweat and you have given off water and now you lack it. Okay, you lack water. Okay, so dehydration reaction is a chemical reaction that gives off water. So just like whenever you sweat, you give off water, and it forms a new, larger substance. Okay, and this is how polymers are built from those tiny monomer pieces. So for example, if we have two monomers, and these monomers have the functional group on there. If you look back at the last slide, it's alcohol functional groups there. If those two react, they're two individual pieces. Remember, mono means one, so there's just one piece and one piece. They will react, and the O and the H and and then just the H from this side will come together and make water, and that will be given off, and that'll just be like a side product. It won't be used anymore. And then those two functional groups have reacted, and they formed one bond in the middle. So this little bond right here makes one big polymer. And the final reaction we're going to look at is hydrolysis. So this is going to be the opposite of dehydration. So lysis means to break or to break down. And then hydro in this case does not mean hydrogen, but means water. So we're going to use water to break something down. So this is a chemical reaction between water and another substance, and it forms two or more substances. And this is how polymers are broken down back to monomers. So it's basically a reverse of that last slide. Excuse me, guys. So we have one big polymer. It takes in water this time, so water goes in, and then it breaks that polymer up into two separate monomers. And if you notice that water is also broken apart as well, so that H2O breaks up so that the OH goes to one side and the H goes to the other. Just to connect to what will be our next topic, our carbohydrates. I've drawn down here a example of one of the carbohydrates that we will look at in our future videos. And here you see that we have two rings. So each ring in this case is a monomer. And in the middle, these rings are connected with this bond right here. But then we take and we add water to that, and whenever we do, it breaks that water up. Part of the water goes to this one, part of the water goes to this one, and at the end we have two individual monomers. Okay. So again, guys, that is the basics, very minimal basics. We could go a lot more into this, but minimal basics of carbon chemistry. If you have any questions at all, please comment down below and I will help you guys out. Feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Have an awesome rest of the day and see you next time. Bye.